Hey everybody, welcome back to this week's episode of the One Thing Podcast. I am so delighted to bring on my next guest, which is Julia Hollenberg. I've been wanting to speak with Julia for over 2 years on this podcast, and we finally got together. She is a colleague in the Seattle area and is one of the most talented in our field. She is a food and body therapist, certified intuitive eating counselor, yoga teacher of 14 years, breathwork facilitator, and an endless explorer of the human inner landscape. She's passionate about helping people create a trusting and peaceful relationship to food and their body, and to practice something called embodiment, to experience more joy and richness, and to kind of claim oneself as a sovereign being. We go into a lot of these aspects during the conversation, such as why it's so difficult to walk that path, and also challenges people have, such as eating disorders, body shame, and other struggles that people have in coming from a place where they can connect with their body and their body's needs. And she has a number of dynamic viewpoints and really a rich understanding that's very textured and granular. This is not your everyday interview where you're getting answers that are cookbook or textbook. Julia has lived this path, and it's really obvious from her answers and responses that she paints a realistic picture and helps people get on a path that's more of a journey and a lifestyle. And I was so inspired after listening to her, and I'm so excited that a number of my patients work with her because they are in great hands. So I really hope you enjoy this interview. We go into so many facets that I think you'll walk away with an understanding of what it's like to enter a journey where you're connected with your body and embracing the connection between food and body and having a peaceful relationship with oneself. So without further ado, I welcome you to the next episode of the One Thing Podcast. Julia, welcome to the One Thing Podcast. It's so wonderful to finally get a chance to sit down with you. I've been wanting to do this for a couple years now, at least.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yes, I know that we're both enjoying kind of a nice sunny afternoon here in the Seattle area, and I really appreciate you putting aside some time to speak with us today.
Of course.
So I think it'd be a great place to start to kind of understand your kind of early memories of some of the work that you do, because you have a very eclectic practice, tying in a number of different philosophies and, on a foundation of nutrition and other aspects. And embodiment is sort of one of the things you're passionate about. And what are some of the earliest experiences you had of being like introduced to some of these approaches?
Oh, it's really sweet to think back to some of those memories. And I feel really grateful for the upbringing that I had. I had wonderful parents who were present, and it was just a really stable environment. And I feel really grateful for that. And one of my favorite stories, I don't know that I can say that this is an explicit memory, but my mom tells this story of me so sweetly of, I was probably 2 or 3 or something like that. And in our house, the spice cabinet was on the lower part of the cabinets, so accessible to a little toddler. And I would open the spice cabinet and just take one bottle at a time, and my mom had them all alphabetized, unscrew the lid, smell it, and put it back, and just kind of go down the line. And so I love this story, and I think it really speaks to this natural curiosity that I had for, natural curiosity in general, but also this affinity for the senses. really wanting to
Mm.
explore through the senses. And to this day, I do enjoy cooking, and I love, herbs and spices, and um, have a pretty good palate, like can pick out particular
Wow.
ingredients in different meals. So that's a really fun memory that I can trace back this sort of affinity for the work that I'm doing now. Um, and again, there were lots of wonderful things. My mom cooked dinner. We sat around the dinner table
Mm.
eating, and that was a really lovely part of um, developing my relationship to food. Um, and I was always very active too, lots of different sports, and it was always on a team: gymnastics, competitive cheerleading, volleyball. Um, and that was wonderful. And yet, when I look back at my movement experience, it was always around performing or competing in some way. So it was moving for a particular outcome, definitely
Mm-hmm.
to win or to get a good score or something like that. And so there wasn't necessarily this cultivation of how does it feel? What do you enjoy?
Mm.
Even though I did enjoy those activities for the most part. Um, and so I can look back and see that that link of like to my inner world was missing. Um, and for all the wonderful parts of my childhood, I also grew up in a household with a mother who was a chronic dieter. And so
Mm.
I really sort of witnessed and absorbed that difficult journey for her. And it was never directed at me, but kids absorb a lot. And I think that I'm in the majority of people my age who had a mother who was on and off diets a lot. That's just kind of what was
Mm-hmm.
happening in that generation. That was
Right.
happening in culture. And so it's just not to place any blame, but to recognize that that was something that shaped my relationship to food and
Mm-hmm.
body. Um, there was also a lot of weight stigma and fat phobia that I heard in my family. There were lots of medical
Mm-hmm.
professionals in my family. My dad was a
Yeah.
physician. He's
Yeah.
retired now. And so there were these little seeds being planted amongst the wonderful things. There were these seeds being planted that told me that I needed to watch my body, that I needed to be careful, that I couldn't gain weight. That would be the most terrible thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and those were some of the seeds that that sort of grew into a period of real disembodiment for me, like a lot of lack of connection.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I struggled with an eating disorder for a number of years throughout
Mm.
college and after. And so since then, it's really been a winding, interesting, difficult, rich, organic journey back to myself, back home, to
Mm-hmm.
really an embodied state.
Mm. Wow, that is a really interesting story, and it's so relatable in a lot of ways. I'm sure for a number of people that are listening, and so real in that, like, you have this fondness and appreciation of your parents, and the role that they played in your life. Yet you were impacted by the environment, and the various messaging you were hearing, and even though there's obviously an affection and love for your parents, and it's just really refreshing to hear that there's sort of just both versus sort
Mm-hmm.
of this one story of you know this happened and it was because of this, and it seems like you've really done so much work on this, and your understanding really shines. um, I love the memory of you smelling the spices. That's just awesome. Yeah, there's this. I don't know if you know of this tradition, but in Judaism, at the end of Shabbat, there's a service called Havdalah, where the end of the Sabbath, the last, basically the last prayer, the last component before the Sabbath is over. There's like a candle lighting kind of ceremony, and then one of the last things you do is you smell spices to sweeten the upcoming week.
Oh,
So
how nice.
yeah, and so I instantly thought of that. That's because it's such a profound sensory experience to kind of, you know, have that olfactory kind of stimulus and make an intention around it.
Hmm. Cool.
So yeah, so let's kind of go further into this in kind of the concept of embodiment. And
Mhm.
I like your example of being an athlete and, you know, sort of being goal oriented and focused on winning and competing and not necessarily being in your body and kind of being aware of like how you were feeling in those moments.
Mhm.
Is that kind of a lead into embodiment, kind of that dichotomy of what is embodiment?
Mm. Yeah, I'm happy to share from my understanding of it. And it's really, I can't tell you just how wonderful it is to be able to share with you about my understanding from an embodied perspective.
Yeah,
Because I think we like learn things cognitively and then we like sort of repeat them. You know, as good students,
right.
we learn things and then so I want to share with you what I've learned and what I believe it is. Um, Embodiment for me, as I understand it, as I feel it, is using our bodies as a primary way of experiencing the world and our lives, and of navigating the world and our lives.
Hmm.
So we're sensing from the inside. It's an inside out approach, right? Sensing from the inside and regarding the body as a source of wisdom, as a source of knowledge that we can use to navigate our lives. And then we also can use it to experience and enjoy our lives.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Makes sense to me, you know. And it seems, and this is sort of taking it in a direction, but you can bring me back if you need to. But
Okay.
um, it seems that this would come natural for some people, and for other people, it would just be like really difficult. You know, because how long have they? How long has one been disconnected? You know, from their body. You know, and it's almost like a strange land to enter into.
Totally. Absolutely. Absolutely. I really think that so much of what we struggle with, and I'm generalizing here to sort of our culture and our culture. I think so much of what we struggle with, we really have this crisis of disconnection.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, there are any number of things that can create a disembodied state. So, you know, one of the things that I experienced was just a lack of cultivation of my inner world. I'm a very
Mm-hmm.
sensitive person and I feel a
Mm-hmm.
lot. And yet, what was being encouraged of me was intellect and logic and thought. Um, a lot of skills that have made me successful in the sort of outside world, the outward facing
Mm-hmm.
world, but sort of a stranger to my own inside world of intuition and emotion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I mean, I work primarily in my work with people with eating disorders or disordered eating, any form of disordered eating. And when someone is struggling with an eating disorder, that is a fundamental state of disembodiment.
Hmm.
Whatever the pattern is of eating or moving, it is an overriding of the body's signals, a misattunement, an overriding, or an avoidance, perhaps, of what's
Hmm.
happening in the body. Uh, and so that, that's difficult. It's difficult to heal from that. Not impossible, but it is difficult. Um, I also think, there's actually such wisdom in disembodiment as well. And it's so important to me to really honor the parts of ourselves that um, feel difficult or that feel like they're holding us back in life in some way. Um, when people experience some difficulty or experience trauma, it can be a survival mechanism to disassociate from the horrific pain, be it physical or emotional, that's happening in the body. Uh, and that dissociation is protective. It's survival.
Yeah.
And so, for people who are struggling with embodiment, like there may be a very, very good reason why that disconnection happened and why that struggle is there.
Yeah.
I think it's important to really honor that.
I think that's a great point. And I think knowing that is comforting for people who are, sort of identifying with the fact that they might be disconnected from their body, or that they do that as a kind of a protective mechanism. I mean, there could be deep-seated trauma and experiences that are really scary to access.
And it
And
makes the
so,
body feel like an unsafe place, right? It literally
hmm,
doesn't feel safe to sort of land and feel and use the body, as I was saying, as a way of experiencing the world. And so
yeah,
energy goes right up into the head. Like let's use the
yeah,
brain, let's use the head, and become very, centered in the head. And there's a disconnection. And
hmm,
again, that's the can be the body's way of accessing safety.
yeah. And intellect is it's in a sense it's so accepted as being kind of a mode, if and embraced and encouraged. And then, when someone's coming from a space of like full connection and intuition and awareness of their body, they might feel that sort of they need some type of checks and balances system, and kind of go right back to the intellect
Mm-hmm.
as being the ruler of their kind of sense of being.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so common. I mean, I have experienced that in my own life, and I see that in the clients that I work with as well. When we start to, you know, work on intuitive eating, it can feel like you've swam out into the middle of the ocean and you can no longer see the shore. And it's like, there's no ground under your feet. You can't see land. And it's just this sort of can be like this unanchored feeling. And that there can be a real urge to grasp back onto the rules
Hmm.
um, that eating disorders provide or that diets provide. So yeah, there's a lot of discomfort and a lot of unknowns in that
Yeah.
process.
And I think for just knowing that and being able to explain that feeling is really important, because, it's like not knowing that there's going to be, when you first enter into this space, not knowing that there's going to be that feeling of like lack of boundaries around you, and sort of this kind of I'm swimming sensation, or a perception of that, that it could, knowing that you might experience that, and that's a possible process that you need to, that you would be going through is probably helpful, It's kind of like um, if someone is trying to make a change or trying to grow as a person, and they're aware that the roadmap might involve these stages, and that's to be expected,
Mm-hmm.
then it makes it easier to navigate.
Mm-hmm. A little bit. Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's well said. Uh, it's I think I guess starting out in kind of the beginning stage of this, can you talk a little bit more, like other things about this process that makes it so difficult? You've already mentioned a lot, but I'm just wondering if there's anything else that you hear, that's like a common feedback you get from people you work with or from your own journey.
That makes embodiment feel
Yeah, it
difficult.
just makes the,
Mm-hmm.
kind of the embodiment process difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I may answer that in a bit of a roundabout way. And
Hmm.
what's really arising is sort of recognizing the patterns or the sort of symptoms of a disembodied state, or what that could look like in our lives or feel like. Um, and so when we are disconnected from our body and the energy and the sort of locus of our attention goes up into our minds, it's really common to feel like you're over intellectualizing things, or you people say, I can't get out of my head, or my thoughts are spinning, or and that's a version of anxiety, right? There's anxiety, um, and there can also be this pattern of looking outside of yourself, right? Constantly looking outside of yourself for the answer, right? And in my world, it's the diet plan of what to eat, right? Look to someone else for what to eat and how to eat the right way. So it's this sort of looking out everywhere in the world to other people, like, oh, they must be doing it right. This must be the right plan. Um, Looking everywhere other than within. And
Hmm.
that causes a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear of, like, am I going to make the right decision? I don't know. I don't know how to make a decision. Because from a disembodied state, our inner locus of agency, our grounding, our connection to, agency is, I think, the best way to say it, is buried. It's still
Yeah.
there, it's just buried or atrophied, as the pattern has been to really think and overanalyze and try to figure out the right way of doing things.
Hmm.
And I think there can also be, from a felt sense, a sense of lack of juice in life. That's my official term, juice. Meaning, we might just feel that sort of buzz of anxiety and some fear, but without the sort of full range of experiencing human emotion. So, from a disembodied state, we're doing our lives, but not experiencing our lives.
Yeah.
And yet, because living in the mind is so conditioned, right? We see the intellect in our culture as supreme.
Hmm.
We see it in the way that education systems are set up. We see it in the way our medical systems are set up, and even
Hmm.
our religious systems. In
Hmm.
that, the mind is sort of supreme, and the body is viewed as an obstacle, or if we're talking about
Hmm.
religion, sinful. We want to
Hmm.
transcend the body. Um, so there's all sorts of cultural messaging that makes it really difficult to start to do the work of deconditioning, operating from the mind, and
Hmm.
starting to reattach our connection to the body's wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I say one more thing about that? I feel like
Oh,
there's one.
absolutely.
Yeah, I think the other thing as it relates to body image, right? We are whacked upside the head from every direction around the way that I'm just going to say a woman's body, since that I work primarily with women, not exclusively. And I am a woman, so that's how I've experienced the world. Um, we are just bombarded with messages about the way that our body should be in order to be loved or accepted or feel included or healthy or to just be okay. And
Hmm.
that norm, the cultural norm, is very narrow. And so when a person has an experience of falling outside of that norm, there is this disconnection that happens, this divide, and this feeling of my body is not okay. It's not good enough.
Hmm.
And it is an act of absolute rebellion for a person who doesn't fit that cultural norm of what a body should look like according to our beauty standards and diet culture to
Hmm.
say, I refuse to believe that message. My body
Hmm.
is good. I am worthy. It's it's really radical and it's very difficult to reject the cultural messages and start to really come into a sense of empowerment in one's own body.
Yeah. Yeah, it sure is. Um, you know, I think about all the people and the pain and suffering that people are going through and this kind of internal, just, kind of day to day hell, going through trying to live up to whatever that is. And it's heartbreaking. And to know like 20, 30, 40, 50 years could go by where every day is that existence.
Yeah, so
And
deeply ingrained, so deeply.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and to know that like there's this alignment that can happen, of what you're talking about, where, you know, your frame of reference can change to who you are, and to love yourself in that way, to stop looking for to become someone else or to compare to someone else. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, like, that's such a, on so many levels, it's so profound, because what can come from that philosophy is much, much more than sort of appearance or, you know, body weight. It's, doing, it can align you with your purpose, right?
Yeah, it's an affirmation of the self at a really
Mm-hmm.
core level rather than a rejection. And I think, that's one reason why I am so passionate about embodiment work is because it really starts to shift the conversation and shift the focus away from, right, body image, which is largely about appearance, right? How do I feel about how I look?
Mm-hmm.
And usually that's compared to some idealistic image, idealized in
Mm-hmm.
quotes, right, according to culture. And it really, because, I find that's usually a losing battle, trying
Mm-hmm.
to get to a place where you feel really good about how you look because it's
Mm-hmm.
so fickle. It's so fickle.
Right.
Our body goes through changes. We're all getting older. Our skin's getting saggier. It's all happening because we're living, changing organisms. And so the pursuit of being happy with body image and how you look is really unsteady ground.
Yeah.
And I think it's great, for people who do have that sense of like, yeah, I like the way I look today. That's great. But that's not the focus, right? So that's where the embodiment work comes in, where we get to just shift. It's like turning 90 degrees and shifting our focus to viewing the body as a vessel, as an instrument, as a way that we experience our lives. And what is there to delight in? What is there to appreciate? What is there
Mm-hmm.
to notice about how you experience the world through this body? And then it starts to
Mm-hmm.
get super interesting.
I bet. Yeah, I bet the world becomes extremely like uh, more tactile and more textures and more colorful, and
Mm.
it's and sort of more alive. And is that the case?
Yeah. I mean, that's been my experience in my embodiment journey. It's like, um, mm, and I want to say too that sort of when we're talking about embodiment, we're really thinking about our sense doors, opening up our senses to experience. We're also talking about our emotions, right? Feeling our emotions, and also our intuition. So absolutely, it can really bring a vibrancy to life, through these really tiny moments that we were
Mm-hmm.
completely overlooking before, um, because we were looking in the other direction, trying to contort ourselves and our bodies into something that it's not meant to be, and feeling
Yeah,
really frustrated and angry about that.
yeah. Makes me think of getting to a place where you're coming from such a deep sense of trust, um, that your awareness of your environment, you're trusting it, you're trusting how you're being and the senses that your perceptions and the information you're accessing, versus this side of you that's like the inner critic, or the you know pessimist that's sort of keeping you from like fully being.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, yes. Um, yes, I think trust is really the word that I picked up out of what you said, and it's so important and so difficult. And I want to put this into perspective for people, because I know that, based on my own experience, the journey is long, and so I want to put this into perspective. So I I struggled with my eating disorder for 6-ish years, like with the sort of overt symptoms and behaviors of an eating disorder. And it was, it's been, let's see, how can I say this? So that was 14 years ago. So it's been 14 years for me where I really feel like the signs and symptoms of an eating disorder, you would say, were resolved, healed, right? In recovery. And yet the relationship with my body and the sense of building self-trust has taken so much longer than
Mm-hmm.
that. And it's really just in the last few years that I've done some really deep and intensive work around this, that it's starting to really land, and it's so exciting for me, um,
Yeah.
and and wonderful. And I do feel like my life has really come into full color, um, and it's not because like big things happened in my external world that I feel happy about. It's all the relationship to the inner world. And I just wanted to share that because trust trust with oneself takes so long to build, and
Oh yeah.
it's just a long organic journey. And to expect that it's going to come in your first 1 or 2 years of being on this journey, or of healing your relationship to food and body, is, not really realistic. Um,
Yeah.
but yet it will feel that way because you keep just accessing deeper and deeper and deeper layers of it. Um, And so it feels really good every time you do get to a new place of like, oh, yeah, okay, I feel like I can trust that now.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you kind of paint that sort of realistic kind of overview of someone who's lived the journey and, has been on this path because I think that's really helpful. And I think, really if someone is sort of just dipping their toes into this I think making steps towards a different way of being with yourself, even just being on that trajectory can be so exciting. Like you might, you just to just know that you've you've found a way to embrace yourself, and it's going to take time and it's going to be work, but it's it's a direction that is coming from a place of love of self and honoring of self, and a lot different than sort of scrolling Instagram looking for the next solution,
Mm,
for something that you perceive is wrong with you.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Mm,
So, I mean, I think that I've experienced that personally, where um, something is kind of like a breakthrough idea, and just moving in that direction alone, there was so much energy behind it, even though I knew that I was just starting.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it just feels, you talk about a body sense when you're on. Can you share about like some of the things that you've experienced when you're on the right path, um,
Hmm.
or when you know that you're aligning with sort of yourself in a way that feels authentic?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's this experience that's coming to mind that could seem insignificant, but for me, it feels very significant. So after I graduated from my undergrad, I moved to New York City and was living there for a few years before I moved to Seattle. And um, and that was a time where I was still sort of intermittently engaged in my eating disorder. So it was still very present for me. And I found my way to yoga. Right?
Mm,
I was having sort of an emotional crisis, and there was just this overwhelming sense of needing to channel my energy into something positive. And so I started going to yoga, and I hopped around to a few different studios and found a teacher who I really liked. And being in her class, it was just, in the physical movements, because of my background with sports and gymnastics and things like that, the physical movements felt resonant in my body. It felt good. But there was something else. It was like it was like this little shimmer of something that I felt inside. And I didn't know what it was, but it was just pulling me in that direction of like, I need to follow this and
mhm.
investigate it more. Um, and so I did. I signed up for yoga teacher training. Having only
Oh,
practiced yoga for 6 months, it was that sense of like, I need to be immersed in this. I need to really, really investigate, and find out what this sort of. It was like something that makes you sit up and widen your eyes. Like, what's that? I want to know more. And so I think that feeling of curiosity and this sense of wanting to lean in and know
hmm,
more, like that is one way that I think our body can let us know, like, hey, that direction.
hmm.
Um, and the real part of the story that I wanted to share is that as I was in yoga teacher training and, practicing yoga multiple times a week, I was also running. Right. So running was the form of exercise that my eating disorder told me that I should do. So I'm
Hmm.
doing both at the same time. And because I had started practicing yoga, I started to make these links in my felt experience that, oh, when I go running, if I practice yoga that day or the next day, my body feels very tight, like rigid, like locked up in a way,
Mm-hmm.
especially my
Mm-hmm.
hamstrings. And so I really started to make this link, and I wanted to have more freedom and flexibility in my body. And I knew that was my natural state. Um, and it was it was being on my yoga mat and being encouraged to notice what was happening inside. There's a there's a tenet in yoga philosophy called svadhyaya, which is um, self-study. So this is a very central thing that we do
Mm-hmm.
in yoga. We go inside and we study our own experience. And that allowed me to make this link of what was happening in my body as a result of these different types of movement. And that's the thing that allowed me to let go of running. It
Mm-hmm.
was the sense of, oh, I want to move in this direction. And so I'm going to let this other thing go. It
Mm.
was not an overt, I need to do this for my recovery. It was just this sort of this intelligence and this wisdom coming from below. If you could see my hands, I'm
Mm-hmm.
gesturing to
Yeah.
like sacral area, like
Yeah.
pelvic area, like coming from
Mm-hmm.
below of like steering me in the right direction for my
Yeah.
well-being. So that was a really profound experience for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. And it's, I think these experiences are things that when one experiences them, it's something that you have to learn to own and not question, right? 'Cause- and not have to run it by other people. Or, I mean, part of the journey is just getting to that place of yes and believing it.
I agree with you. And there's a whole bunch of messy middle where there is so much second guessing. And that's part of it's normal, right? So for people who are like, wait, I question myself all the time, it's normal. I've certainly been there and still am there in some ways, in some arenas. But that sense of trust grows stronger and deeper each time we choose to not second guess ourselves. But I think what I wanted to share
Or
about
how
that
about
is, oh,
this
yeah, go ahead.
to add into that, being comfortable with that uncomfortableness.
Oh, Adam, you hit the nail on the head. So, yes, yes. And we human beings do not like discomfort. We don't like ambiguity. We don't like discomfort. And I think that's partly why the body is this kind of scary place, is because there can be a lot of enjoyment and pleasure, but there can also be a lot of discomfort when we start to tune in to the body. And, when we step onto the path of saying, I want to feel more connected, we're actually signing up for, whether we know it or not, the pleasure and the pain, the joy and the sorrow, right?
Mm, mm-hmm.
The ease and the dis-ease, right? The discomfort. So we get it all. We don't get to pick and choose, actually. And so embodiment is really about embracing the fullness of our human experience.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I think that's exceptionally said. I mean, it's just, I think people um, are really getting blessed with your words right now, because um, it's so easy, and I think can be part of it could plug into previous structured beliefs of saying like, well, if I just do this, everything's going to be okay. Or, that I'm kind of going back into another extreme way of looking at something, versus you kind of painting the picture of all the different textures and the realness of like the full experience of pain, sorrow, joy. It makes it so real.
Mm.
It makes it so something like that gives a person permission to be human through this and not feel like this is just another thing that I need to do right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a beauty of embodiment and of, the intuitive eating journey is it's about reconnecting to yourself. And there's no way that you can do it wrong because
Mm-hmm.
what it is looking at your experience and feeling your experience. And that's it. Like it's not wrong. It might be uncomfortable sometimes and it might be amazing at times, but you can't do it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, it seems like it breaks negative cycles and just kind of puts you in a process of living versus like a cycle of trying to get it right. Did I do it right? Did I get there? Did I achieve the goal?
Mm-hmm.
No. Okay, what can I do better? This kind of cycle we see these patterns of in our lives, but what you're describing is to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, is more of like just a way of living and being a lifestyle approach, a philosophy of life.
I totally agree with you. I love that phrase or the word process, right? So embodiment allows us to enter into the process of living, which by nature means everything's changing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can't cling too tightly to any one thing or any one state or any one circumstance in our life because it's all changing. And when we do the work of becoming connected to ourselves, it's sort of like we become we become like an empty boat riding on the waves, right? So
Mm-hmm.
life is always there are always waves,
Mm-hmm.
right? And from an embodied place, we can sense where there's a swell and we can listen and we can adjust. And then there's an ebb. So it
Mm-hmm.
allows us to kind of dance and move with life, with the ups and
Mm-hmm.
downs in a way in which we're not fighting ourselves or
Mm-hmm.
fighting life. And so, life
Yeah.
is difficult, but at least, from an embodied place, we can remove that added layer of difficulty of fighting
Yeah.
life.
So along those lines, what about relationships with people who aren't on this path and how, you know, that and life events and other things that kind of pull away. How do you navigate that? So for example, there's uh, a, a parent that needs you to be their caregiver or um, big events happen and it's kind of like, I mean, at least in my experience, for a lot of people, they just give up their own needs
Mm,
and just kind of put their own stuff on hold,
mhm,
and which you know we don't have to kind of debate whether that's one way or the other. It's just that would be a threat to someone who's embracing sort of this process of embodiment. And you know I'll give you an example. Just like staying up all night in the hospital to help someone, or and then going back, say if it's a long illness, or going and helping someone who's in need, and you're putting your own needs aside, which are honorable acts in a lot of ways, but at this point there might be sort of this disconnect that kicks in again. How do you talk to people about those kind of life quakes?
mm. Yeah, that's it's an interesting question. And so when we think about balance, it's not a steady state. It doesn't mean that everything is comfortable and nice all the time. right? So there are waves, like we were just talking about that analogy of the ocean, right? There are waves. And I think, you know, the question that helps me anchor into an embodied state is to ask, how is it now?
Hmm.
And in that example that you gave, that question of how is it now could be, okay, I am willingly entering into a giving position where, you know, I'm going to be sleep deprived, I'm going to be tired. Um, and this is a wave, right? Maybe there's an unpleasantness to it or a difficulty emotionally and physically. So that might be a part of the answer of how is it now, right? What is my
Hmm.
life circumstance presenting for me to navigate?
Hmm.
That answer to that question of how is it now could also be, it's important for me to support this person. I want to be there, but I can't do it alone. Right? So how do I bring someone else into here so that I can get a good night's sleep, or so that I can take
Hmm.
a couple hours for self-care, or whatever it might be? So yeah, that question of how is it now, for me, really helps to clarify, bring clarity and honesty to what is happening, both in the external circumstances of our lives, but also in our own internal worlds as well.
Hmm. That's beautifully said. It gives me a sense of like fluidity and life, and the opposite of that would be, sort of like a firm rigidness of um, feeling like you can't give that because it would threaten control or a sense which I think is a big problem a lot of people struggle with is, needing their routine, needing their structure, but I love how you say, just sort of identifying and then also being aware enough to know that you might need some help and assistance. And so you don't completely abandon that side of you that needs to have that sense of balance.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the gifts of embodied living is being able to be connected to ourselves and also connected to others at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, and to have a wisdom of when to move into more connection and when to move into more solo time. Um, if we don't have that connection to our own body and our own needs, it becomes really difficult to do that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and we can get exhausted and resentful and um, anyway, so
Yeah, yeah,
and it's imperfect.
that's
It's a flow. It's very imperfect.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So when you're interacting with people and they're sort of new to this world of what are some of what are some of the early things that you'll hear, like with someone who's sort of wanting to kind of dip their toes into becoming more embodied, or becoming um, moving in this direction? Like, I imagine there's a continuum. Like,
Mhm.
what are some of the more kind of beginner kind of stages of all this?
Mm. Yes. Um, I've never had a client come to me and say, I want to be more embodied.
Those were my words.
I know, but I think it's important to say, that the language, what I normally hear is, I want to feel more comfortable in my own skin, or I want to feel more
Yeah.
at peace. I want to feel more ease. There's a battle going on inside of me all the time, and I'm exhausted from it. Um, Things like that would be what I'm normally hearing. Um, and I think that relationship to food and body, it's been my own path, and I happen to think it's this beautiful and perfect portal to open into the world of embodiment and reconnecting mind to body. It's not that the mind is bad, it's just that they need to work together, right? Become integrated. And so some beginning steps, and I would say, to go back to your what we were talking about with trust, right? There is a general sense of like, I do not trust myself, I do not trust my body.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such an honor for me to be able to sit in that space with people and be a person that is almost like a proxy for trust in their body.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what I see as my central role, is supporting people in developing, not developing, rediscovering, right? Discovering or rediscovering trust within themselves. And like you
Mm-hmm.
said, that can be really, people can second guess a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's part of my role, is to point out the ways in which their body is actually right on cue, like right on target. And
Mm.
can you lean into that? Um, so some of the things that we might start off with in the beginning stages are, um, what do you like to eat?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What flavors are pleasing? Um, and, so this idea of interest or delight, and sometimes we'll even talk about it in things that seem a little bit more peripheral, like what kind of clothes do you like?
Hmm. Yeah.
There can be so much focus on what looks good on me that we forget to ask ourselves, what do you like to wear? What is your style? Um, it can also feel pretty overwhelming for the beginning of an embodiment journey to be listening inward, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially with trauma history, it can feel like just a lot to start to go in. And so meditation is not the first place that we start, or that I would recommend starting, for a number of reasons. But uh, things that allow us to engage in the outside world. Right? So a really basic, brief grounding practice that we might do is to just start the session by feeling our body sitting in the chair.
Mm-hmm.
That's all, right? To feel the back of the chair against our back body, the
Mm-hmm.
sensation of pressure, right? So there's a sensory input, pressure, to feel the seat of the chair underneath the legs, right?
Yeah.
Just orienting down into that felt sense. Um, those are some of the little, beginner pieces.
Yeah. That that's really helpful to kind of hear the sort of a tangible example of that process. Um, with the example related to um, food, kind of identifying like what do you like to eat, and um, what when you're kind of going into that realm, um, is it sort of hard for people to just really be authentic with, like, you know, I want some French fries. I want, whatever it is that they're, kind of sensing, like, how does that conversation go? Is it just sort of like, kind of being an awareness, but does it kind of inform you of more kind of about what a person's needing, like their relationship to food? Like, how can you give more examples of that?
Yeah, it's so individual. And some people have never been asked that question, or
Mm-hmm.
have never really contemplated it, because there's been just years and years and years of the shoulds and the shouldn'ts around eating, that the question of desire or preference doesn't even come into the equation.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes it's just like, what do you mean? What do I like? And there's not a reference point yet in the body to be able to answer that question, but that's okay, right? The point is to ask the question and to just orient in that direction to whatever degree is possible.
Mm.
So yeah, we bring in that question, and inevitably the food rules and the shoulds come in, and that's okay. That's part of the process. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and as I work with people, I'm constantly just gently redirecting back in the direction of um, the body, what the
Mm-hmm.
body thinks and feels, what the body wants, what the body needs. And in that way, it's like my guidance becomes an advocate for their body, like a voice of their body, um,
Mm-hmm.
to start to consider that perspective, which can be brand new for a lot of
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Um, I have a smile on my face because I'm just thinking of people that you've worked with over the years that I've known, like that I've referred to you or you've referred over to me. And I love just hearing them talk about food and their process that they've been with going through with you because there's an energy around it that's sort of light and playful and,
Mm,
a sort of kind of, I'm okay with what I'm doing. And there's not like a shame energy that comes through and I'm I'm all for that and love that because I love people's just being authentic. It's like there's no there's nothing that good comes out of long term out of, sort of my experience of being hard on yourself or thinking that you should be doing it differently. It's just like, this is what I'm doing right now. This is, what I'm cultivating. And I see that with your patients really great and just like the lightness around food. And it's just really a pleasure to work with.
mm, Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's I agree with you. I don't think there's any good that comes from, you know, hanging on to shame and shoulds around food. And in fact, that 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 elicits the stress response in our bodies. And we know that the stress response negatively impacts our health, every aspect of our health. And so
Yeah.
such a big part of this work is actually removing some of those stressors so the nervous system can get a bit of a break, at least in this department. And physical and mental health really improves when stress is lower.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. I also
So
want to
you've
say
moved
too
in.
that I want to return the compliment, Adam.
Oh.
That what I hear from my clients who see you, they just feel so heard.
Hmm.
They appreciate the spaciousness and the time, and there's a real sense of care that they walk
Hmm.
away from after seeing you. So, very grateful
Thank
to you.
you. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's great to know. I mean, it's I just feel like, you know, when my patients are kind of at a place where they're connecting with the energy and the the sense of self-care that you're talking about and self-embracement, like my job is pretty much I've I feel like at that point they're on their way to being like their own physician. It's like from that point of where you're really honoring yourself and your mental health and your self-care and that self-love, it's like to me that's like a really good sign of health overall. So I'm always excited when people are working with you because I just know there's a um, there's a good like a good path ahead.
Mm.
Um, but thank you for the compliment. So you're going into helping people sort of through retreats, and you've expanded your practice into kind of more of intensive experiences with people. Can you talk about the retreats you're doing and sort of what goes on those retreats?
Yeah, well, this is a new venture for me, and I have been cultivating and sort of incubating, I suppose, how to really weave together my worlds of food and body therapy as a dietitian, and also my uh, love of more embodiment practices like yoga and breath work, um, to really combine those together, because I think nutrition therapy is not enough. The embodiment practices create all sorts of side doors and paths into the process of healing, and that's really exciting to me. So, um, where I'm headed in a not so linear concrete fashion, but this
Hmm.
is where my desire and sort of intuition is bringing me, is really wanting to weave together these different offerings, these different parts of who I am as a provider. Um, and so I'm hosting an embodiment retreat in the first weekend of August in Bend, Oregon, and it's a 2.5 day experience. And the invitation is, it's a small group, it's a women's retreat, and the invitation is to step into a space where we are practicing bringing our locus of attention down into the body.
Hmm.
And there's like a whole buffet of different things that we're going to do,
Hmm.
from some gentle yoga, some breath work practices, eating, right? We're going to eat together. So there
Hmm.
is the intuitive eating part as well, engaging with nature, and then the community connection as well. And it's all, the container is really going to be set to continually reorient toward the experience of the body, and
Hmm.
embracing, as we were talking about before, the full experience, whether it be lovely and pleasant or whether it be kind of uncomfortable. um, and I also, there's such power in getting groups of people together to
Yeah.
share and support one another. So, I don't know what it's going to turn into. It's going to be its own organism, the group dynamic, but I
Yeah.
feel really confident that there's going to be something magical that I can't plan for, that just comes
Sure.
from gathering a group of women who are intentionally wanting to cultivate this embodied connection to themselves and their lives.
Yeah. And when they return from the retreat, will there be some way of continuing to be in contact, like as a community or to connect with others? Is that part of
I'm
it?
not sure. I mean, I suppose that could be a conversation, not
Hmm.
planned, but it's a nice idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've had that experience personally when I've gone to retreats where when we got back, we just kept in touch with some people in our local area just to kind of like uh, remain connected
Hmm.
and
So
continue to
nice.
share um, things that you experience. It's always it was helpful. I'm sure it's not for everybody, but it was good for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the idea.
Yeah. Um, so I think we've really gone through a lot today, and I really appreciate you hanging in there with some of my questions and
It's been a
just
delight.
it. Yeah, it's there's so much to this, and I think it can continue to kind of grow as a discussion because I think the world, um, we no longer are sort of we no longer have blinders on how energetic our bodies are and
Hmm.
how our breath influences us and all breathing mechanics and
Hmm.
our sense of connection of our whole holistic organism and how important that is to kind of have that integrated. And I mean this conversation can grow, and I hope that we can
Yeah.
get back together sometime again, and keep talking about this. on that note, if there's anything like closing words that you could share with us, that would be great. Otherwise, you've shared so much wisdom, and it's been plenty. But if there's anything else that you want to leave us with, please do.
Mhm. I think what's arising is that if you have any sense, speaking to listeners, right? If you have any sense that there is some longing for something more in your life, I would bet money on that the answer is inside rather than outside. And so that sense of dis-ease of like, I'm missing something or longing for something, or maybe feeling like you're existing but not living, that is usually a call to step onto the path of embodiment. And it's your path, one path for one person. No one else has mapped it out ahead of you, so there's no wrong way to do it. And to just start. And I'm partial to yoga. I think a yoga practice is a really powerful container to start to explore connecting to the inner world. It's not the only one, but I think it's a really good one. And you just kind of follow the breadcrumbs, and it's mysterious and it's unclear, and that's part of it. And I've had to make peace with that, which was not easy, but it's not meant to be clear. It's meant to be this like bit by bit unfolding of the journey of coming home to oneself.
Well, wonderful. It sounds like a very worthy adventure. And I hope people, will join your retreat and continue to kind of learn from you, because you are just you have a real gift. And, I think a lot of people don't speak to the granularities of things like you do. They can kind of organize it in a very like concrete way, but you have all the textures and granularities of your expertise, and that's just really special. So thanks again for being here, and look forward to future conversations.
Thanks so much, Adam. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the One Thing Podcast. Please share these episodes with your friends, loved ones, colleagues, patients, healthcare providers, anyone who you feel might benefit from hearing these informative interviews. We tend to learn best from people sharing things with us. That's often the first time it's introduced. So don't hesitate if the content of these episodes reminded you of someone that might benefit from it. Forward the episode to them, and I'm sure they'll either appreciate it or be appreciative that you've thought of them. So once again, we'll look forward to seeing you next episode on the One Thing Podcast. And again, much appreciation for you being here with me.